Our Constitution does not grant rights that are subject to the whims of fear or political pressure. It guarantees them outright. And the COVID era serves as a stark reminder of what happens when we sacrifice our principles due to fear. Public health should be restricted to public concerns. Means free of coercion. We all know about the Nuremberg Code. The Declaration of Helsinki followed in the 1960s. Then we had the U.S. Belmont Report, which I believe was in the 1970s or 80s, and then UNESCO's Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights in the early 2000s. These are rights that are acknowledged worldwide. And so this is something that should just be very straightforward. When a person is forced to undergo a medical intervention under threat of losing their job, education, or public services, that is not consent. It is coercion, and it does not belong in a free or just society. There's a man here today. Doug Cameron. My family has been friends with Doug for many, many decades. Doug was pressured by his employer to get a COVID shot, manifestly against his desire. He is now in a wheelchair and will be for the rest of his life because of that. His employer was afraid and pushed him to get the shot to show an example to the rest of the employees. That employer has now passed on. Doug is going to have to live in a wheelchair for the rest of his life because his employer pushed him to do something against his will and his conscience. This should never happen again in this state. I urge you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee to vote yes on S1023. Medical freedom should not be a partisan issue. This is about the fundamental right of every individual to make medical decisions for themselves. Idaho has already banned COVID shot mandates in the Coronavirus Stop Act. Why should this be any different? If we fail to defend this principle now, what comes next? You know that there are people who are planning already and trialing chipping our hands and ultimately chipping our brains. What if that becomes a condition of normal engagement in society? What if somebody told you you had to take an antibiotic or a drug like ivermectin or anything else to participate in society? Would that be okay with you? These are not, just fanciful ideas. These are things knocking on the doorstep, and we must act now to prevent Idahoans losing all of their freedoms.
Are you getting close?
I am. I have a couple more comments. I think the last thing I really want to say is that we should support this legislation because Idaho rejects coercion, because Idaho wants to be the shining light on the hill that leads the way for the rest of the nation in understanding that we and we alone are sovereign over our bodies and that our God-given rights belong to us and to no one else. I can't imagine anything being more obvious than the right to choose what medical interventions we submit to. It seems to me just obvious on its face. So I ask you all to let Idaho be that model. Let Idaho be the example, the shining light on the hill, and vote yes on S1023. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. I stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions, committee. Senator Anthony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And witness, I am so sorry. I did not get your name.
Manoukian.
Say that again.
Ms. Manoukian, I believe.
That's correct,
Manoukian.
Mr.
I
Chairman.
am so sorry. Ms. Manoukian, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank you for being here today. I appreciate your testimony, and I agree. I think what you've stated with regard to our rights and our ability to have that autonomy is correct, and I think it's in line with thinking of the Idaho legislature. And what you'll find is with this particular piece of statute, probably most of the members of this committee voted for it. So you have an audience here that agrees with that medical autonomy and that bodily autonomy. So when we look at this piece of legislation, what I have to now figure out is how to thread the needle to make sure that it's defined well is where I'm at now. And so I'm looking at the definition, and I just need to, all the principles you discussed, I'm 1,000% behind. Now I have to just understand that, am I drafting this bill correctly, right? Is the law gonna work right? And so the definition is where I'm at. And so the definition means any pharmaceutical or biological agent or product designed to alter or restrict the biological functioning of the body. Can you help me, do you know where that definition came from, or can you help me understand that a little bit
I
better?
do know where it
Ms.
came
Menuchyan,
from.
please go through the chair.
Apologies. Mr. Chairman, Senator Anton, the definition was something that I wrote in consultation with many other individuals who have been involved with writing legislation and coming up with definitions. To me, the definition is very, very clear. So it would not have any bearing on any choice that didn't alter the functioning of the body. So a mask actually elevates the CO2 quite rapidly and alters our biological functions, a huge cascade. There's research showing that masks actually can cause stillbirths in animal studies and things like this. So a mask would have an impact. A Band-Aid, on the other hand, would not have an impact. A steroid cream or a hormone cream would have an impact. Any kind of pill or injection that is, FDA approved would have an impact, because that would be a medical intervention that is licensed by the FDA. So any kind of drug, biological, which are vaccinations, those things could not be mandated by anyone. Mr. Chair.
Follow up, Senator
Just a
Anton.
quick follow-up. So I'm just trying to thread the needle. What about like soap? If I had to make my employee wash their hands with an antibacterial soap, wouldn't that alter the body?
Ms. Menuchyan.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anton, I don't believe so. Those are not regulated in any way. Those are available over the counter. They sterilize just the skin on the hands, and only for a few seconds. Once those are actually pretty much performative, because within a few minutes of actually using one of those antiseptic or antibacterial creams or soaps, your body repopulates the area very quickly. So it doesn't actually alter the biological functioning in any long-term manner.
Senator Ruchte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and Ms. Menuchyan, the thrust of your bill is that no school or business would be allowed to require a vaccine or a medical intervention. I think that includes vaccines. Are there exceptions in the bill for disease outbreaks, an outbreak of tuberculosis, polio, mumps, measles?
Ms. Menuchyan.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruchte, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Ruchte. No, there are no exceptions for those things, because those are interventions that can actually injure or kill you. Not to mention the fact that those interventions are not permanent. There have been thousands and thousands of cases of mumps in the last 20 years in fully vaccinated populations. In, I think it was 2006 or 9, there were 6 or 8, 10,000 college students, all fully vaccinated, or 98% fully vaccinated, developing mumps. Same thing applies to whooping cough and many of these diseases. And many people actually test positive for tuberculosis, even though they don't have tuberculosis. We all have staph and strep on our skin, even though, or many of us do, even though we don't actually have those diseases. This is not something that I think should be forced on anyone. One, because I think it's wrong to actually force someone to do something to their body against their will. But two, because no one else knows our medical background. No one else knows our needs. No one else knows what's best for us. And no one has to live with the consequences of our choices, like Doug Cameron.
Senator Ruchte, follow up.
Just one follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Menuchyan. Do you disagree with this statistic, that the polio vaccine was licensed in 1955, and from 1951 to 54, an average of 16,316 paralytic polio cases occurred, and 1,879 deaths from polio were reported.
Mr. Chairman.
Menuchyan.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruchti, I don't disagree with the actual data, with the numbers, but I do disagree that it actually reflects what happened in the country. And here's the reason. This is what is always, explained or anyone who questions the vaccines is challenged with this data. And here's the thing, what most people don't know. When the vaccine for polio was introduced, the diagnostic criteria to determine whether or not someone had polio was changed concurrent with the introduction of the shot. It went from having to require only 2 days of paralysis to, I believe it was 60 days of paralysis. And it went from having no blood tests to having 2 blood tests. In addition, all the cases that had been attributed to aseptic meningitis and Coxsackie virus were folded in with polio until they introduced the polio shot. And after that, they separated them out, which artificially lowered the number of polio cases and deaths attributed to polio. And it bears mentioning that in countries that never introduced the polio vaccine, polio died out as well. There's a large body of evidence that polio is actually results from neurotoxins that are put into the environment. So I totally disagree with what the actual data suggests, even though I think the numbers are, reported as such.
Senator
And can I-
Ruchti,
Oh, Mr. Chairman, just one follow-up then, and that'll be it.
you can pull your mic over close. There you
Oh,
go.
just one follow-up, and then I'll be done with this witness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Menuchyan. Then how about this statistic? Smallpox from 1900 to 1904, an average of 48,164 cases and 1,521 deaths. Do you disagree with that statistic?
Ms. Menuchyan.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ruchti, yes, I do. If you actually analyze the data, what you will find is that smallpox died out after they ceased using the vaccination because it was causing more cases than it was helping. And that was the same thing with polio. And let me just say, I actually made an award-winning documentary on vaccines. It came out in 2011. So that film was vetted scientifically by a leading pediatrician and the world-renowned rheumatologist, the founder essentially of autoimmune research in the world. I'm just sharing that I've been researching this issue for over 20 years. And I used to think exactly what you think, Senator Ruchti. I used to be completely in that camp until I started doing a deep dive. And I learned that actually what we've been told about our history with respect to infectious diseases and disease mortality is not accurate.
Senator Burnt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Menuchyan, thank you for your presentation. Well thought out, well prepared. Walk me through the part of the bill that encroaches on private business in the private sector. I'm a small business owner. I'm a pro-business conservative. Always have, always will be. And so that part of the bill I'm struggling with. Can you walk me through why you just didn't leave it with the government and the public sector and why you encroached into the private sector?
Ms. Menuchyan.
Chairman, Senator Burnt, the Coronavirus Stop Act tells businesses that they can't mandate the COVID shot. And this is merely an extension of that. And the reason that I believe, I imagine that you all voted for that bill, or those who did voted for it, is because you understand that we do have a fundamental basic human right to decide what interventions we submit to. And this is no different. This is essentially just taking that fantastic piece of legislation last year and extending it to all medical interventions. I don't think anybody should have to risk their life, make health choices, in order just to get a job, to earn a living, to go to a restaurant or an entertainment. I'm 100% with you about the rights of businesses to do what they want. But doesn't it stop at your personal right to live the life? Businesses can't tell you what to believe from a religious standpoint. They can't tell you that you can't speak. They can't infringe those rights. Why should they be able to infringe your physical body? If somebody does that out in the street, that would be rape or assault. And yet, when it's done under the pretext of health or public health, it's somehow acceptable. And I think we need to shift how we think about this to a completely different way, which is, I think 100 years ago, it would have been unthinkable to do these kinds of things. And yet we've sort of like drifted into this direction. And so this is not about a restraint on businesses. It's about a protection of the most basic, inviolable human right, which is the right to decide how one treats their body and deals with their health.
Senator Taves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Manukian. Is that right? I appreciate the bill and your testimony. I have a question. I'm just trying to think through the business impact as well. And I'm wondering if anything in this bill would prevent a business from testing for communicable diseases. So maybe they could catch it on the front end. Would that be a case of medical intervention in your understanding, or is that maybe some way that a business could operate with this legislation in place?
Ms. Manukian.
Mr. Chair, Senator Tays, the testing, I think it would really depend, but may I respectfully request what businesses test right now for anything and or ever have in our history other than for coronavirus? That was deemed necessary in the last 5 years, and it turned out that it was based on a lot of hype, exaggeration, et cetera. So I don't think that that's even something that we should be considering. That said, I suppose if someone were to spit into a vial or something to be tested, that would be, that's clearly not going to affect you. But I mean, I know people who did the swab up their noses and it punctured the membranes surrounding the cerebrospinal fluid and they had it leaking down the backs of their throat. That's too far.
Senator Taves, follow up? Nope. Don't see any other questions. We're going to go to some testimony and lead off with Alex LeBeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Welcome to committee. Just introduce yourself for the record and who you represent. I'll give you a couple minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. My name's Alex LeBeau. I'm the president of the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry. We represent hundreds of thousands of employees and employers from across the state of Idaho, and we're here in opposition to this piece of legislation. However, I'd like to state that we appreciate the zeal and the philosophy behind the legislation. We share that view. I mean, it was Oliver Wendell Holmes, Republican appointee into the Supreme Court, said, "Your rights end where mine begin." But we still oppose this legislation based on the way it's written. The original legislation, the scaffolding that was carefully and deliberately negotiated over 2 years with many of the folks in this room, we were part of that negotiation. We thought at that particular point in time we had reached a compromise. This is where it would end, and we would be begrudgingly there to let the bill go without opposition. And we did that. We lived up to our end of that commitment. We believe that an employee already has all the rights contained within this legislation. But philosophically in Idaho, if you do not want to submit to an employer's procedures designed to keep other employees and customers safe, you are free not to work there. If that is what you desire, you're free to start your own business. But this bill goes too far by mandating businesses submit to the whims of their employees. We do not understand the language, and we believe that while it was thought out, we believe that perhaps there is some haste in how it was written. The requirement of the medical mandate, and I believe that Senator Anthony asked this question, what about the requirements for hand sanitization or sanitization in general of an individual in order to handle food? What about the testing for hepatitis in restaurants to ensure that the customers are safe by the people preparing that food? What about the requirement to wear a respirator in a number of different businesses in order to keep the employee safe, let alone the product? And while we don't represent schools, as a volunteer coach, I'm really curious if this legislation prohibits me from delivering an EpiPen shot to a kid that's having anaphylactic shock. I'm required to do so under first aid and the first responder requirements under all of the things that allow me to be a coach there in the first place. And when the other mandate that we require of children is that they bring their inhalers with them if they're asthmatic. We require them to take it if they are having an asthmatic attack.
If you could wrap up, Alex.
For these and larger philosophical questions, we are the least regulated state in the union. We'd like to stay that way, and we respectfully request that you hold this legislation in committee. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to address any questions.
Are there questions for Mr. LeBeau? Thanks for being in committee, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Katie McCullum? Katie's not here. How about Fred Birnbaum? Okay. Bonnie Schuster? Third time's a charm. Welcome to committee. Just introduce yourself for the record and yeah, there you go. Get it down there where we can hear you.
Chairman Guthrie and committee members, my name is Bonnie Schuster. I live in Boise. I represent myself, and I oppose Senate Bill 1023 and urge you to do the same. I had similar concerns to some of the ones that were expressed with Senator Anton's questions about the definition, which seems to me to be too vague and potentially problematic. And I was thinking about things like food service workers having to wear gloves, hairnets, so many of these things could be interpreted as being against this particular bill. And I think those sorts of public health aspects of it could cause us serious problems. With regard to the vaccinations for children in school, we don't mandate every child has to be vaccinated. There is vaccination documentation that is required when you enroll in school, and it is very easy to opt out of that for various reasons, including simply personal reasons. That seems to strike an appropriate balance between protecting our students, all of our students in the schools, and the rights of the people who do not choose to vaccinate their children. And just as a final observation, we're talking a lot about medical freedom here in this hearing, and it seems like it would be more consistent with Idaho's value of individual liberty if we would take a very expansive view of medical freedom and not pick and choose the issues where we find that it applies, because it seems like that's what we've been doing recently. Thank you, and I would ask that you oppose this bill.
I don't see any questions. Thank you for being in committee. I did see Fred Birnbaum walk in. If you want to take the podium and introduce yourself for the record, who you represent, and while you're doing that, Katie McCullum will be next if she's in the other room, and also Heather Gagliano would be after that. So welcome to committee. Introduce yourself.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Fred Birnbaum with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. We stand in support of this bill, and I think context is important. There's an old saying that, hindsight is 20/20, and I think if we look back at what happened during the COVID era, none of us would believe that how that unfolded was appropriate for the people of Idaho or the U.S. So I think what this legislation really is, it's about being prospective, because we do have the benefit of hindsight. And I think the core of the issue is not so much about a debate about the polio vaccine or the efficacy of other vaccines. It is about whether the marriage of expert opinion, science, can be married with the coercive power of the state to impair people's livelihoods. And nobody more than us respects, the rights of businesses. But I think the examples given are not the likely ones. The ones that we saw during COVID were the likely ones. And just recently, President Trump reinstated thousands of military personnel who were discharged for refusing the vaccine. And now I guess they're being reinstated. So yes, there is risk that with legislation that's broad against medical interventions, that you could find some example. But I believe the experience of what happened during COVID is 100x greater than the risk that somehow someone won't get a vaccine or wash their hands or something like that. And for those reasons, I think in the state of Idaho, it is important not to allow the marriage of the coercive power of the state with expert opinion. As they say, an expert is somebody who's 40 miles from home, and we certainly have a lot of experts running around, and we saw very conflicting opinions from them during the COVID era. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll stand for questions.
Senator Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you this morning. Fred, you gave an example of President Trump's reversal in the military, and I applaud President Trump for doing that. The distinction between what President Trump did with the military, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and the private sector are two different things. I know that he hasn't mandated anything regarding the private sector. If I walk me through that.
Mr. Birnbaum?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Byrne, if you recall, the previous administration, President Biden, actually did mandate that employers with more than 100 people, I believe, require the shot, and then that was thrown out by the Supreme Court. What wasn't thrown out was the CMS requirement. So I think the danger absolutely exists for private employers, but again, the Supreme Court rejected that, and the service members weren't protected, and hence that's why they're now being reinstated. And frankly, losing your livelihood is sort of today's equivalent of going to the gulag, right? We don't send people to the gulag, but most people, if they lose their livelihood, their life is impaired perhaps forever.
Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Birnbaum. I appreciate what you're saying. I'm thinking back on COVID, and I carried all the legislation during those COVID years and trying to get rid of some of those restrictions on people in Idaho. I'm just thinking, and I hear what you're saying about weighing the risks. The testimony I heard this morning was this would take care of some of the mask problems. I know that in the legislature this year, we're going to have a good mask bill. And that mask bill has been very carefully structured, as I understand it, to deal with the private sector and make sure that we don't mess that up, right? And so, I'm looking at this piece of legislation and I'm looking at the definition and I'm thinking of, and I don't know a lot about this, but I'm thinking like Micron and their clean rooms, right? And so I know that what I do understand is you get in those clean rooms, you're going to have to suit up, mask up. And what I heard in testimony today is that when you force somebody into that mask situation, the testimony was that will trigger this piece of legislation. And I know that I've got a mask bill coming later that will carve out some of the oppressive stuff we saw during the coronavirus years. So you see, I'm weighing all this out and I'm looking at this definition. I'm thinking, man, this is really broad. And then I'm going to have these two pieces of legislation hitting each other. And so I'm weighing all this out and I'm saying maybe we can fine tune this definition just a little bit and still arrive at the place where we need to be on both those pieces of legislation. So I know you're a smart guy and you know what I'm saying. And so this is what I'm weighing out, and I'm trying to be very, very careful about how we draft statute so that we don't hurt our businesses and that we still protect these liberties. And so I'm just throwing that out for you to comment maybe on.
There was a compliment in there. You're welcome to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Pro Tem Anthony. So although normally we don't speak about other legislation, I am familiar with the mask bill, and for the record, it does have carve-outs related to respirators and things, and that made sense. I think the thing that this bill goes after, and I don't know if I can get to the core of your question in terms of the overlap of this bill with the mask mandate per se, mask mandate prohibition bill, to be clear. But I do think if you look at the core of the issue, this bill was a repurposing of the Coronavirus Stop Act. So I think my framework, our framework, is it really relates to that. I guess it's hard for me to see that someone who works in a Micron clean room will claim that the necessity, because they obviously understand what they're doing and it's a very high-tech environment, they would then go to Micron and say, under this, I'm not wearing that. I mean, anything's possible, but I don't think that that is really in my opinion, respectfully, Pro Tem, I don't think that's the core of the issue. I think the core of the issue is what happened, and this is why this bill repurposes the Coronavirus Stop Act, that the medical interventions that destroyed people's livelihood was very much tied to, and the mask didn't destroy people's livelihoods. I mean, they might have hurt people's health, but taking a vaccine that they didn't want to, that in hindsight, and now we can be prospective, was damaging to people, and it was even pushed on minors, and we have tons of data that it was absolutely unnecessary. I think that's the core intent of this legislation. I probably didn't address exactly what you were asking. Could this be better drafted? I think it's tight enough, Mr. Chairman and good members of the committee, and I don't worry too much about the overlap with the mask bill.
Okay, thank you for testifying.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Heather Gagliano?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, sorry. Senator Ruchte looks like he has a,
I do have a question for Mr. Birnbaum.
yeah, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Birnbaum. You know, one of the lessons we learn when trying cases is you learn lessons from your last case, but you don't look at your next case as though it's going to be absolutely the same. And I think coaches do the same thing. Learn from the last game, but don't assume that your next game is going to be the same as the last one. And I come back to this idea that we're taking whatever lessons you've drawn and others have drawn from the coronavirus, where hundreds of thousands of people died from the virus in this country, and whatever defects you found in the response to that, and we're going to cement those in legislation restraining our businesses and our schools to protect their employees and our children. Why do you think we should put into statute the lessons you have learned from coronavirus when we don't even know what the next disease that we're going to be facing an outbreak from is going to be?
Mr. Birnbaum.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruchte, you know, you're asking a speculative question. I mean, we have the history of diseases up until now, and there've been all sorts of variants. And I guess I'm trying to place my thinking about what the next disease would be. I would actually flip this around. The elements of the medical community, and certainly the public health community, and certainly the recently pardoned Dr. Fauci, they have undermined the public trust in our view. And that's not our fault. It's not the fault of the citizenry. And so I think that's brought about this bill because people have this skepticism. And we saw voices that were suppressed, scientific voices, medical voices. So I would say, and this was brought up by the sponsor, in earlier times, this wouldn't be necessary, but we're looking at what happened recently, and that's why we support the legislation. You know, I guess worst case, because you do this, if it didn't work out, you can modify legislation, but I don't see this as presenting the threat to businesses or other entities that perhaps you do.
Follow up.
No, but maybe just a comment that I recognize it's a speculative question, but I guess that's my whole point. Prior to COVID, we didn't know what COVID could do, and I suspect prior to tuberculosis and measles and whooping cough and Ebola, we didn't know about those diseases and what they would do. So that's the point.
Heather Gagliano. are you in the committee? And then after that, we'll go to Katie McCollum. Welcome to committee. Just introduce yourself for the record and who you represent.
Good morning, Senator Guthrie and committee members.
Hold that mic down close.
A little bit closer, sorry, thank you. So good morning, my name is Heather Gagliano. I'm here today as a longtime resident of Idaho, a nurse, and a mother of 2 school-age children. Just recently in Idaho, we had 2 school districts closed down to massive amount of illness in students and staff. In 2024, we had over 1,000 cases of pertussis here in Idaho, and those were mostly in school-age children. Some of those individuals had to be hospitalized. Diseases thought long gone are now back in the U.S. and back in Idaho. Children should be in school learning and not waiting for entire schools to get sanitized due to mass illness. So vaccine rules in schools is a value for Idaho and the United States. Back in 1827, there were actually rules for vaccines in schools. This is a traditional value. That's before Idaho was even a state. Senate Bill 1023 goes against this traditional value of vaccine rules in schools. I do want to point out that Idaho does not have a mandate for vaccines for schools. Let me repeat that. No one is being forced to get a vaccine to go to a school. Parents have the right to choose whether or not they provide vaccine records. And those records are vital when those outbreaks, which are occurring, do occur, to be able to contact parents, talk to school districts, make those decisions on what they need to do about those outbreaks. So parents have that freedom of choice, whether or not their children can provide those whether they provide those vaccine records. I'm asking you as a parent, as a nurse, as an Idahoan, to maintain those traditional values of keeping children safe, of maintaining those values, and vote no on Senate Bill 1023.
I don't see any questions, but thank you for being in committee this morning.
Thank you.
Katie McCollum, did we find her? Doesn't appear. Stephanie Nemore? And let's go with Tasha Hussman. You're Stephanie? Okay. Welcome to committee. Just introduce yourself for the record. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to talk to you today. My name is Stephanie Nemore. I'm a longtime Idaho resident, almost 40 years now. Mother of 2 preschool-age children, soon to be elementary-age children, and I'm here representing myself, and I am an attorney. This legislation, as we've already sort of gone over, proposes changes to what is currently the Coronavirus Stop Act enacted by this body a few years ago, and this was for the purpose of ensuring that no individuals were treated differently or discriminated against as a result of their vaccination status. But these proposed changes in this Senate bill expand the reach of the existing Coronavirus Stop Act, as you know, which regulates all business entities, and it proposes to add an additional regulatory requirement for what schools can require. As written right now, presently schools are not included anywhere in the Coronavirus Stop Act. And I don't know exactly why that is, but I believe it's because Idaho Code already has a full chapter on immunizations in schools. And these proposed changes would effectively nullify that entire chapter. That's at Title 39, Chapter 48 on immunizations. And in that code section, the vaccination, what is required is vaccine documentation to attend school, which is a reasonable and necessary measure. But the very next section provides parents with a simple and easy opt-out requirement. A parent just has to provide a written statement saying you object to the immunization documentation requirement, and that's it. I want to make sure my children are safe, but I also want all parents and guardians to be able to choose what is right for their child. And I think what exists right now already strikes a nice balance. So I ask for your no vote on Senate Bill 1023. Thank you.
Thank you for being in committee. Appreciate it. Tasha, you're right on the ball. Thank you. And after Tasha will be Elizabeth Kreiner. Welcome to the committee. Just introduce yourself for the record.
Chairman Guthrie and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony. My name is Tasha Hussman. I live in Boise. I was born and raised in north central Idaho and attended Idaho Public Schools. I'm the mother of 3 children, 1 in preschool, 1 in elementary, and 1 in junior high. I am also employed as a school nurse. I am fervently requesting you to vote no on Senate Bill 1023, and here's why. Nurses continue to be one of the most trusted professions in America, and as a school nurse, I'm a liaison for families and their healthcare providers, including fielding their questions about childhood illnesses and vaccinations. Each family in Idaho today has a choice on whether to vaccinate their child and to provide documentation to the schools. Under Idaho Code 394802, parents or guardians may request an exemption on medical, religious, or other grounds, and we are to ensure parents know they have this option upon registering a child in school or otherwise. When I am contacting parents who have not yet submitted documentation, whether it's an exemption or a vaccination record, they're always grateful for the reminder. Because let's face it, life as a parent is busy, especially when you're registering a new child in school or starting kindergarten. Parents trust the nurses and their schools to be safe places to send their children. As mentioned before, we've had a new emergence of measles and high cases of pertussis in our state this last year. I should have the confidence of sending my children to a school that has records in place so that when and if an outbreak occurs, we have data to drive decisions on how to best handle those outbreaks. Simply closing schools for mass cleaning causes major education and economic disruptions for families. As a nurse in this potential situation, I want to continue to be trusted to be best serve my school community with all the data and resources that are available to me. This bill ties my hands behind my back. I ask you to hold the line with parental choice and freedom we already have in place to avoid the further disruption to families and education. Please vote no on Senate Bill 1023. Thank you.
Thank you for being in committee. Elizabeth Kreiner, and after that will be Kaylin Cleveland.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a question for her.
I'm sorry, sometimes your mic gets hidden behind the, come on up, back up. It sounds like you're not going to get away that easy.
Great.
Senator Ruckte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I missed your name.
Tasha Hussman.
Hussman, Ms. Hussman. Thank you, Ms. Hussman. Are vaccination rates for measles in kindergartners decreasing in the state of Idaho?
Ms. Hussman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Ruckte, for that question. Yes, they are decreasing. Exemption rates for kindergarten are increasing. Am I answering your question correctly? We currently are at, I believe, 14%, which is well above the United States average.
And just one follow-up.
Follow-up.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as those rates of those vaccination rates decrease, are cases of measles increasing?
Ms. Hussman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, measles are increasing in the state of Idaho. We're seeing more emergence. Just in the last 20 years, we have not seen a single measles case in Idaho. And last year we had, I believe, at least 20 new cases in 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see any other questions.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Kreiner. And then Kaylin Cleveland will follow. Elizabeth. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Kreiner. I'm here today on behalf of Food Northwest. Food Northwest is a trade association representing food processors in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. We were another organization that was involved in the negotiation and work on the underlying law that exists today and have concerns with respect to some of the language that's already been discussed this morning. So I would just add that we too have concerns with the way this has been broadened. Food manufacturers have certain requirements of employees in order to protect the public, in order to best ensure the safety of our food supply. And we believe that there are some gray areas in the language here that create concerns. And as you can imagine, businesses don't want to get into gray areas and litigation unnecessarily because that drives up the cost of doing business. So we would ask you to vote no on the bill today.
Thank you for being in committee. I don't see, Senator Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Kreiner, what would be some of the gray areas that you're talking about that you have concerns with in the bill? If you can be more specific, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Kreiner.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Byrne, it's the same concerns that were raised by Senator Anthony related to medical intervention, and that definition is pretty broad. We don't know, does that impact gloves, masks, certain hand washing protocols that may be required, and other things in a processing plant, again, to protect the public, to protect the work that's being done in the plant.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Let's go with Caitlin Cleveland, and then Pam Eaton will follow. And if Katie McCullum's in the other room, just wave or get my attention when you come in. We'll sure have you come up. Welcome to committee. Introduce yourself for the record, and the time's yours.
Thank you, committee chairman and committee members. My name is Caitlin Cleveland. I am here today as a born and raised Idahoan, a mother, an immunocompromised patient, and a pharmacist, which makes me uniquely qualified to speak on this issue. And I strongly request you to vote no on this bill. First, as a parent, I believe the government is overstepping their right by enacting this policy. Part of my decision in choosing which daycare to put my son in was whether or not they required vaccines. Parents like myself should be able to make that decision, just like parents currently have decisions on whether or not to vaccinate their child. Second, as a single parent and immunocompromised patient, I'm concerned about my ability to provide for me and my son. First, if my son gets sick, I have no one to watch him, so then I have to stay home from work. Second, if I get sick from something he brings home, then I have to stay home from work. One cold or flu or case of measles can be enough to wipe out any sick or personal leave that I may have. And then with multiple occurrences, I risk looking at taking unpaid leave, which then puts me at risk for paying my bills, paying my mortgage. This in turn can lead to unnecessary costs to the state because at this point I would need state funding and welfare in order to provide. And this is not just for me and my son, but other families who are in similar situations. Third, as a healthcare worker, my concern extends past my son and I's safety. We have these requirements in certain settings for a reason. For example, hepatitis B is a very serious liver infection that is spread through blood contact. There is no curative treatment, and because it is so serious, every healthcare institution I have worked in has required you to either provide proof of vaccination or at least write an acknowledgement saying that you understand the risks of this bloodborne pathogen and that you decline being vaccinated. This still gives us a choice on whether or not we want to be vaccinated, but it also prepares us for the case of an outbreak or exposure. Vaccines are critical to reducing outbreaks, serious complications, hospitalizations, and even death from these diseases. So I urge you to reject this bill and keep our vaccination laws as they are for the health and well-being of my family in Idaho. Thank
Are there
you.
questions for Ms. Cleveland? Don't say any. Thank you for being in committee. Pam Eaton. Welcome to committee, Pam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Pam Eaton, President CEO of the Idaho Retailers Association, which includes pharmacies, the Idaho Lodging and Restaurant Association, and the Idaho State Pharmacy Association. And every once in a while, there's a bill where all three associations do oppose or support, and in this situation, all three do oppose this bill. For a lot of the reasons that you've already heard. You've heard the healthcare reasons. That's why a lot of our pharmacies, you've heard the business reasons, that it's infringement on business rights. But a couple of things came up in earlier testimonies and some of your questions and comments that made me think of a couple other reasons, which we identified, but I wasn't going to talk about, but I will now to give wider testimony. So one of the things that came up was an EpiPen, and another thing to think about is Narcan. So we passed state law to allow business entities and others besides the individual to carry and have EpiPens and Narcan in case there is an allergic reaction or in case there is an overdose. In all businesses. So for example, many restaurants have EpiPens available and in their restaurants in case there's an allergic outbreak. Pharmacies have been trying to, not only do they carry the Narcan, but they also try to encourage other family members and other businesses. And I know that the police force and those types of businesses also carry Narcan in case they come up with an overdose. So the question with this, and whether it was intentional or non-intentional, is there's question on, would anybody be liable in the businesses if that was administered? And I think it is unclear. So with that, I will stand for questions.
I don't see any questions. You brought up an interesting point. I'm wondering where defibrillators would fit into this conversation as well. So anyway, thank you for being with us, Pam. Misty Cardfeld, and I'm going off the sheets that have signed up at the door. Or Catherine Jones. Somebody's coming? It looks like we're getting one from across the way. Welcome. Are you Misty? I am. Yeah, just introduce yourself for the record, and thank you for being in committee.
Thank you, Senator Guthrie. I'm Misty Karlfeld. I run Health Freedom Idaho along with Sarah Clendenin, and I stand in favor of this bill. And there's been a lot discussed today, and I'm not going to waste your time restating things that have been said. So I'll just share my own testimony. I have an autoimmune disease that nearly took my life, and it was a vaccine injury. The Mayo Clinic gave me 7 to 10 years to live, and 7 years if I did not do the chemotherapy, and 10 years if I did do 3 years of chemotherapy. I decided not to do that and to totally go the natural route. Now, if any of that had been mandated, like it is for kids and for other people, and especially through insurance, it incentivizes people, right? It would have been free for me to do chemotherapy at that time. So taking the risk to do the natural route was completely on me, right? And so everybody handles that differently. Some people with my disease go the chemo route, and some people don't. And what we're saying here is that every individual is different. How I made my decision was I didn't look to the government, I didn't look to insurance, I looked to my maker. And I asked my maker what I should do, and I followed that. I also, with this autoimmune disease, do not ask that other people vaccinate themselves for me or wear a mask for me. And that's the individualization that we're talking about here. Total medical freedom where each individual gets to decide what's best for themselves and look to our Lord and our Maker to help that guidance, not the government. Thank you so much. I ask that you do pass this bill.
Thank you for being in committee. Appreciate it. April Cheney, are you with us? And also Catherine Jones. There's one of them. Welcome to committee. Just introduce yourself for the record.
Hi, my name's Catherine Jones. I'm a pro in this because during COVID, we had a lot of mandates, and one of them was masks within our school. And I played a lot of sports throughout high school, but during that time, I played basketball, and we were required to wear a mask. And so me and my 9 teammates, we all were required to wear a mask while we were running, while we were fighting other people on the court, while we were basketball playing. And like, I have asthma, so it was extremely difficult to breathe. And we've protested before to our school, and it never got like taken down. So we had to, for that entire time, wear a mask. And so I would like to be pro in this, or urge you to be pro so that these mandates don't come to like high schools, and so that asthmatics like myself don't have to wear a mask and run. And I'm a post in basketball, so actually fight somebody for a ball with a mask on. Thank you.
Senator Burnt has a question.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, for a comment, Ms. Jones, thank you for being here this morning. I appreciate your testimony. Took courage.
Thanks.
Don't see any other questions. April Cheney, are you with? Oh, okay, thank you. Let's go with Kate. I can't read the last name. Dickinson? Dirksen? Some of these, you must be a doctor, right?
I'm not. I'm a biologist, though. Good morning, Senator Guthrie.
Sorry for not interpreting your sign up here, but welcome to committee. Just introduce yourself for the record and the time's yours.
Thank you. Good morning, and good morning to everyone on the committee.
Pull that mic up close so we can hear you.
Oh, I apologize. Is that better? Okay. Due to the, good morning, committee members, and thank you for holding this hearing. I am definitely in favor of this bill. Senator Anthon asked a question about the definition of medical countermeasures. As a biologist, I've studied this from the time that it started. Back in the fall of 2019, when there were cases in China. I was very aware of this. I've been working with many people around the world on this topic of SARS-CoV-2. But I wanted to define the medical countermeasure for you really quickly. Where did that go? Let's see here. Hopefully well, anyway, I will put it on the record in another way. I don't want to take the time. The reason why I'm in favor of this bill is because I want for future generations to have the freedoms that I did. As a biologist, I knew from the get-go that masks did not stop nanometer-sized viruses from coming in or out. I knew that that was completely wrong. Fauci himself said that as the pandemic was getting going. I can guarantee that there are more voters in the state of Idaho, having grown up in Coeur d'Alene and living in Boise. I'm an Idahoan. I can guarantee there are more voters that would agree with me on this bill, in support of this bill, than business owners. I realize that they're concerned maybe with a little bit of the language, but I cannot tell you how impressed I was with Leslie Manukian's testimony, Fred's testimony. I'm going to work my hardest to share this information with as many people as possible from a biologist perspective who understands SARS-CoV-2. We have a lot of support on this. I really urge you to support this and pass this bill. My time's expired. I will take questions from anyone.
I don't see any, but thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you, Senator.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sarah Clendenson. And after that, I don't have anyone else, but if there is someone, just get my attention that didn't get signed up.
Okay.
Welcome to committee.
Thank you.
Just introduce yourself for the record and who you represent.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Sarah Clendenin. I represent the thousands of members of Health Freedom Idaho around the state of Idaho. I do have prepared remarks, but first I want to address a few things that have been said here. First of all, there's been discussion about different diseases. I just wanted to point out the fact that from what Ms. Manukian had presented, in a lot of cases, outbreaks of what we think of as vaccine preventable diseases, the outbreaks, quote unquote, are typically in fully or very highly a high percentage vaccinated populations. So when we think of outbreaks in school settings and other places, oftentimes the vaccination rates are 98% or higher. So these vaccines are not preventing disease. To address the mask mandate prohibition bill, there's no guarantee that that will pass. And so my concern is that if we are not in support of one bill because we're hanging our hat on another bill, what happens if that one does not pass? The other thing, actually, I'm just going to go into my remarks. When the time and place in which God gave you life, your Esther 4:14 moment on this earth is here in this country, and just 2.5 centuries after Benjamin Franklin warned us that we have a republic only if we keep it, you realize that you have a responsibility to this American experiment, a responsibility to defend the inherent rights of the individual. You have the privilege of standing strong and defending our God-given rights and securing them for future American generations. The most sacred among these rights, that of bodily autonomy, self-determination, dominion over yourself and your life. Without that, you are not a free man. You are a slave. Every other right can only be realized and exercised if your bodily autonomy is recognized, respected, and upheld in law and in practice. It comes only after sovereignty over your own life that you have the right to defend yourself and your family. It comes only after bodily autonomy that you have the right and ability to speak and express yourself freely. It comes only after the right to decide what goes into your body that you can demand and expect due process. There are many names for it now: medical privacy, health freedom, parental rights, but it remains the same meaning: the right given by God to be free of tyranny and violations of your body, your mind, and your family. This bill is the culmination and hopefully codification in Idaho law of that God-given right of bodily autonomy. Idaho has a chance to lead the way back to true liberty. This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I represent people all over Idaho, and the people want our inherent right of medical freedom clearly stated in Idaho law. So I ask you please to vote yes on Senate Bill 1023.
Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being here this morning. Is there anyone else that tried to sign up? That a couple, take you, and then, did you sign up in the back, or? You signed up what? Come on up.
Signed up for the wrong bill. I am here to testify in favor of 1023.
Oh, okay, that's why I didn't catch you. Just introduce yourself for the record.
Hi, I'm members of the committee and Mr. Chair. I am Michael Oswald. I am a self-employed attorney in Boise. My family and I moved here from California 14 years ago to be Idahoans, and I think it would be perfectly appropriate to be counter to California. California errs on the side of coercion. I think it would be appropriate for Idaho to err, if at all, on the side of liberty, and then come back and fine-tune it later if it turns out it needs fine-tuning. That's it.
Thank you. Don't see any questions. Thank you for being in committee.
You're welcome.
And there was one other. Come on up and introduce yourself for the record. Let's see, what do you need so we can get you on the? I want to get you by a mic there so we can hear you. We'll just have you.
Can you see me?
Yeah, yeah, we want to hear you. That's the most important thing. So, welcome to committee, and see if you can get close enough there to. Welcome to committee. Appreciate you being here this morning.
Thank you. My name is Doug Cameron, and I am 100% support of this bill. And I believe what Leslie said and Fred said are very important. I was a farm manager, and I understand some of the issues you guys had as being business owners and stuff, and I don't think this bill is a problem that way as far as masks or anything like that. I was a welder. Well, I don't have to wear a welding mask, but it's probably in my best interest, if you see what I'm saying. So as some of these things that you're talking about are, there's with a mask or shield of some sort, working for Micron or something like that. Anyhow, I support them wholeheartedly. And I hope you guys support this bill. Pass this
Thank
bill.
you for being in committee. Are there questions for Mr. Cameron? Really appreciate you being in committee this morning. Thank you. Anyone else? Don't want to. Okay, with that, Senator Foreman or Ms. Manukian, if you'd like to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I had a nice little closing prepared. I'm not going to use it. I want to thank everybody that showed up to testify. And with all due respect to the people who testified against, they certainly have every right to come here, and I'm glad they did. But again, with all due respect, I think that testimony missed the mark. It was just a little bit out of focus, because this bill and this issue is not about schools. It's not about businesses. And it certainly isn't about vaccines and their efficacy or lack thereof. This bill concerns itself with a matter of human rights, which transcends all other issues. Those rights belong to each and every one of you, and they belong to me as well. No government agent, no school official, no business owner can tamper with or take away my rights. And what goes in my body is my decision and my decision alone. Now, it's been suggested that, you have options in that situation. If your employer says you have to take it and you don't want to, you can go work somewhere else. That is unacceptable to me as a free citizen with rights. Mr. Chairman and committee, I ask you to send Senate Bill 1023 to the floor of the Idaho State Senate with a due pass recommendation. As a decision as to what a citizen puts into his or her body involves a personal choice that should be made free from undue outside influence or any intimidation. In essence, that decision is a matter involving a basic human right. I do appreciate your time, Mr. Chairman. I know this has been a long hearing. Thank you, committee, and I do appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Taves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Foreman,
Looks like we have a question.
would you be willing?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Foreman, first of all, I'm in support of the intent of this legislation 100%. It wouldn't fix the issue that I had with employment where I lost my job or had to resign because it excludes international situations. But I really resonate with what you're trying to do. I have a question of why throughout the bill it references unless required by federal law, no state, county, or local government, et cetera. It leaves that option for the state and local government. It doesn't leave that option for business, and this is my concern. In the case of OSHA, you have OSHA requirements, and the OSHA requirements do require that employees wear masks in certain situations. And so it kind of puts the employer at odds with the legislation, with the federal government, unless there is an option, an exclusion for federally mandated type things like that. So my question for you is whether you would be willing to send it to the amending order for that type of a fix.
Senator Foreman.
Chairman Guthrie, Senator Tays, I am fully in agreement, if necessary, to send this proposed legislation to the 14th. I'm not insensitive to the concerns and questions that have been brought up, and I think the 14th order might be an appropriate place to hash out some of those things and work through them. So I would not be in opposition to that.
Senator Anthony.
Just for a comment and then maybe a motion, Mr. Chairman.
I can't help it. Senator Foreman. What? I'm sorry, I got distracted here with a note that was not relevant, but.
And I don't have anything further. I don't want to make Senator Foreman stand there if he doesn't want to, but just for a comment and then for a motion, if that's okay.
Oh, okay, yeah. Thank you. Senator Anthony.
Yeah, I want to also go on record as fully supporting Senator Foreman and his work here. And anybody who knows me in this legislature knows I've been kind of fighting for freedom from forced vaccinations, freedom for medical autonomy and all that kind of stuff for years, and also the fight that we had during the coronavirus episode. And also just to kind of reinforce this idea that when we draft some of these pieces of legislation, we got to be careful. We got to be careful that when we draft the language, it's good language. And sometimes I think that comes off as frustrating for the folks in the audience who just want to see something really good happen. And I hope that you'll understand that when we ask some of these questions, what we're trying to do is just make sure that we thread the needle the right way so that the language is good. And it's also good for those businesses who have to deal with this when we get done. So I just want to go on the record as making sure that that Senator Foreman knows how much we appreciate the work he's done here, because it is a very important issue. These are God-given rights. These are God-given rights to our personal freedoms. I heard testimony today that we need to codify these things. I'm okay with that, but the truth of the matter is we don't have to codify a God-given right. That's baloney. These are not rights that are created by code. We were born with them. Now, we can do that so that people are clear about them, but the fact of the matter is they were given by God. We don't have to codify any of these. We'll do it so that we can put them on the books, okay? And we make sure that everybody understands them. But the fact of the matter is, as our founders told us, we were born with them. Okay, so I've given my speech. But I do appreciate the sponsors' willingness to let us send this the 14th. We'll look at it, and we will look at it with our business community. And we will see if we can look at the definition, and maybe we can clear it up a little bit so we can tighten it and make sure everybody feels good about it. But the language that Senator Taves has brought up, we can look at that, and we'll make this the best bill that we can make it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I move that we send Senate Bill 1023 to the 14th order for possible amendment.
Second.
Motion by Senator Anthony, second by Senator Taves, that Senate Bill 1023 be sent to the 14th order for possible amendments. Discussion on the motion, Senator Ruckte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be voting against the bill. Sometimes I think bills just have a flawed basis and should be rejected by the committee for that reason, not put on the 14th order where anything can happen and it's just not a place to create legislation. This legislation just seems like it's putting us in a race to bring back the diseases our grandparents worked so hard to eliminate. There's been demonization of vaccines since COVID, and I know some of that existed before, but it seems like it's more frequent, more fervent now. Vaccines, the reality is, gave us freedom from disease, and now we seem to be debating whether that freedom is worth it. And I just don't see the world that way. I think part of what's going on is we have enough distance from the 20s and from the early 1900s and from the times where these diseases had a real impact on everyday families, families in people's neighborhoods. And we've gotten far enough away from that maybe we just don't appreciate what it was like. But people had kids that contracted polio and then were paralyzed the rest of their lives. They contracted other diseases or had outbreaks in their community schools that caused a lot of fear in homes, and vaccines give people confidence that they can send their kids to schools. Like so many issues we debate in this body, this is just about competing freedoms. One person's freedom to not have to use a vaccine or wear a mask. It competes against a business owner's freedom to run their business and to protect their employees. It competes against one parent's right to be able to send their kid to their local school and know that they're not going to be exposed to diseases that another family doesn't take seriously. And so we're constantly in a pluralistic society trying to figure out how to balance these competing interests and competing versions of freedom. I think we do a pretty good job of it in Idaho. I think if anything, we err on the side of individual freedom. And I say that with admiration. I think that is what we should do. But sometimes we take up issues that just go way too far, in my opinion, and I feel like this is one of them, so I'll be voting no.
Senator Burnt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Foreman. He's left. He's not here anymore. Did he leave? Okay. I appreciate the chairman, the good chairman, for this bill, and I appreciate everyone that's came and testified and shared their thoughts with us this morning. It takes courage, especially the young lady that came from school. That takes a lot of courage, and I appreciate your opinions. When I was on the Meridian City Council during COVID, there's one thing that I learned when I look back, and that if I'm ever going to err, I'm going to err on the side of freedom and liberty. Something that I learned then, and I hold true now. With that said, I also have rights as a business owner as well. Being a business owner in the private sector. And so I thoroughly agree with the good pro tem that I hope that the bill sponsor will work in conjunction with the business community to thread that needle in a way that both interests see some positive aspects and protections in the 14th order. Thank you.
Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The intent of this bill is pure, but I think it's important that those who choose not to vaccinate are able to opt out and process. And I truly think more work needs to be done on this bill to tighten up the definitions and the concerns. It's an important topic, and such an important topic needs to be airtight. And I'm not sure that can be done in the 14th, but I guess we'll see how the vote turns out. But some more work needs to be done so it doesn't conflict with other pieces of legislation that are out there. And anyway, that's kind of my view.
Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd regret it if I didn't say something during this committee hearing. I was the sponsor of this original piece of legislation for 2 years, 2022 when I was in the House, and then 2023. And there was a ton of work that went into getting this right for all parties, while making sure that the bodily autonomy of Idaho's citizens was protected. I don't think I don't think this legislation is intending to allow people to be necessarily free of vaccines. You can get the vaccine you want, but it does focus on freedom from coercion. And there's something that I just wanted to address that came up over the last several years as the original legislation was coming through, and that was, where's the line between what business's right and the employee's right? And yes, a business owner owns their business, but they don't own their employees, and they definitely don't own their employees' bodies. And that's one of the reasons that I was so passionate about this legislation. And I'm going to support the motion to send it to the 14th. I do have the same concerns with the definition. As I mentioned before, getting it right is critical moving forward in this realm of legislation. And so I just wanted to be on the record stating that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Don't see any other discussion. Again, we do have a motion that Senate Bill 1023 be sent to 14th order for possible amendments. Those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Senator Ruckte and Senator Guthrie be recording as voting no. Motion carries. Next, we'll have HCR 2,